So here we have an illustration. Again, this is in your guidebook of the three soul essences. So the tonali is at the crown. The teyolia is the one we associate with the heart. And the ihiyoto is the one we associate with the liver. So in the Mexica cosmology, there are three spirit bodies. The tonali is a vital divine source that connects us to the cosmos or sacred cosmos at the moment of conception. And so we need to provide an individual vigor, heat, and ability to grow. So at the time of birth, the babies, many midwives will put heat source near the baby's crown so that it can increase in that vitality. The teyolia, the heart, is the soul and is also considered another life force that resides in the heart space, supporting the manifestation of things on the earth realm or plane. And the third source is the ihiyoto, and this is often considered the breath. The breath manifested in these three soul parts of within the body, Maestra Erika Buenflor says, are animating energies that need to be in balance. So these three souls or animistic entities could be strengthened or weakened during a person's lifetime, giving the human body extraordinary value, vulnerability, and power. And so when we dream, our another aspect of us, our nawali, will trade places with the tonali when we're in the dream state, and then we'll return back when we're in a waking state. So there is moments where these three energy centers operate in other timelines, so to speak. And when we die, it is believed that our teyolia, what carried or what held our soul, leaves in the form of a divine bird to the spirit realm. This is why we think about intuition and dreams as these things that happen in flight, right? Because that's also what happens. Upon our death, the teyolia and the ihiyoto depart from the body. The tonali, however, could be dispersed, because this is kind of like where our soul enters. So it could go and return back right to its light family. But the importance of understanding that the teyolia and the ihiyoto can be dispersed is when we do the velación, when we're doing the ¿cómo se dice en inglés? When someone dies and there's the wake, when we're doing the wake, in the Mexica traditions, and I'm sure this is in other indigenous traditions too, but from the reference that I have, this is why we light the candles for 3 days, because we want those aspects that have been dispersed to return back to the body. Right? And so often these aspects that have been dispersed of our soul, of our vitality in the world because a situation or something happened, or we experience maybe some trauma, those, we want to gather them back. And so the first, one of the first techniques that I'm going to share with you is actually helping support these three energy centers. So for the Ihioto, because we associate it with the liver, this is the domain of passions, right? So it's important to have a good life force here, so that we can be, vital in our everyday with the people that we are. So a good shorthand to understand is the tonali is the life breath, consciousness. The teolia is the life force. And the ihioto is the life's vitality. Okay, so vitality, force, and breath. That would be another shorthand for you to do that. And so I share also an illustration from one of the codices, and how these different body parts were associated with one of the 20 days, right? So in both the Mexica and the Mayan calendars, they have the 28 cycle, the 13-day, right? And becomes the ritual cycle. So for us, just to recall a little bit about Reiki, there's those 3 pillars of Reiki: the Gasho, the Reijiho, and the Kiryo, right? So the Gasho allows us to come into a meditative state and oneness. We do that through the Viracocha, right? Connecting to our luminous field. We do that through honoring the 4 directions. We do that through creating an altar, right? We then connect to that universal life force, right? So that's the Reijiho. It's like, okay, I'm ready to be of service. I'm ready for the universal life force to flow through me. And that's just how we ground, right? And then we go into the Kiryo, which is the protocol in and of itself. And so I'm sharing with you a few of these protocols that can help to revitalize these 3 energy centers. And in revitalizing these 3 energy centers, we're going to be supporting the nervous system. So let's go into the 3 energy centers, and then we'll go back to the 13 items. Okay. So let me share that first protocol then. I'll stop the share here because it's not in your guidebook. It is not in your guidebook. Okay. So when we are about to see the client, so this is one aspect of the protocol, is connecting to these 3 energy centers. And I'll get into each step at the end of the day or at the start of tomorrow, because you're all going to be doing the protocol with one another. But what starts to happen in this aspect of connecting these 3 centers is we are imagining that there is this green light force. This green light force is the individual's soul's essence that's timeless. And so we are inviting that green light force to enter through the crown. And I often, this could be your call as a practitioner, but I often will allow that green light to come in through the top of the crown. And I'll either encourage the client to see it as well, and maybe to clear out any energetic, maybe confusion. Sometimes people come to see me because they're, trying to figure things out. So maybe to bring like clarity of mind. But you could also just imagine that light doing that and not speak it, right? So once it does that, then imagine or share with the client how that light is now traveling down from the crown, dropping into the heart, and supporting that heart space, right? To maybe connect to their soul or to listen. And then I invite them, or I intend for that light to come down to the liver. Now, where is the liver? The liver is on the right side of the torso, right below the rib cage. And it takes up most of this right side of the torso, of the belly. So imagining that light coming down to the liver and helping to clear out maybe any energies that are related to fear or anger, grief or frustration, like whatever, the client will tell you in their check-in what is going on, right? And so just supporting those and then allowing for that light to rise up. And as it rises up, it's going through the throat and back up to the crown. And so there's this beautiful green triangle operating in the background as you're doing the session. And when you set this up, it actually makes your work a lot easier because you got something operating, helping to revitalize these energy centers. And you don't need to do like so much work, right? Often as practitioners, we're like, oh my God, I have to do, and it feels like I have to do a lot of work. And in fact, the protocols are really there to support you so that that energy flows so much easier. So that's one aspect of that protocol that supports these three energy centers in particular. Any thoughts, questions, observations about that one aspect?
Yeah, I actually just found out that my family member is kind of moving into a next stage of their cirrhosis condition of the liver.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I'm considering my potential role to support them in this time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this would be a beautiful one. Like because you're a Reiki practitioner, you could just focus on that one. And that's the thing about this protocol, like all the things I'm teaching you or sharing with you this weekend and this level, each of these components of the entire protocol can be done on their own, right? Like you don't need to do the whole protocol. It'd be great, but you could also just focus on these components or a combination of them and create them in your own Reiki practice. But with that said, you can use the distant Reiki, right? And the power Reiki, right? Shokugei and the Honsatsu Shonin, and have that be the bridge or the bookend to this one.
Mm.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
And again, that could be done remotely or that could be done in person. Right? Cool. All right. Coolness. Let's see.
So in person to use the Honsha Shonen as well, or
Oh yeah, yeah, because you want to program that work to continue.
yeah,
Does that make sense?
yeah.
Okay. So the itis were introduced in level 1, but I introduced them here. And I actually included in your guidebook which aspect of these three centers gets most impacted via this itis. And both Maestra Brahman, I thought I have my book here. I think I have my book here. Yeah, there it is. Nuestra Medicina. It's written in Spanish. But Maestra Roman writes about the itis, and her mentee Atava also writes about them in the book Voices from the Ancestors. And Atava has also written a new book, Curanderex Toolkit, and they've been touring with their book. But this notion of itis, we can think of them as energetic winds or air in and of itself. And how they enter the body is through the 13 portals of the body. And I'll show you that illustration in just a bit. I did include it in your guidebook. But basically, the 13 portals are your joints: ankles, knees, hips, wrist, elbow, shoulders, and neck. They could also enter through any opening, so your ears, your mouth, your nose, even your belly button. And in the curanderas, often warn, and a lot of the stories actually in Maestra Roman's book are like, be careful walking by caves, because sometimes there are hungry spirits there and they will attach you, and that becomes an item. So even though we're encouraged by Maestro Magaña to go into a cave and charge up our fingers for the moon or with the moon's energy, be careful. Either way, be careful. So I write here that theoretically all the idas impact the tonali, right? Because it's an experience of our soul loss. But if they decide to take up residence in our body, it could be due to painful or strong emotions emerging. And so, I had an incident where I was visiting my partner's family for the first time. We traveled to St. Louis, and it also coincided with, I think it was like the year anniversary of my grandmother's passing, but I had not associated like the time consciously. And then we were sitting in the living room watching something, and I just started to cry. And I felt very embarrassed crying because I'm here, trying to quote unquote keep it together. be the proper person meeting the family. And I got Ida in my ear. And the next day we were flying. It was the most painful flight of my life because, of course, air pressure, my ear ache. And I didn't know it was Ida. I mean, I know now, but I didn't know it then. So anything emotional, traumatic, even dramatic can bring up an Ida. So here's the list. Another teaching from Don Miguel Ruiz is when our emotional body is no longer tuned to love, it creates an imbalance in our system. And as I shared earlier by Dr. Seti, when our heart and our mind cannot find resolution, the body will hold it, right? So sometimes a client is going to come in with one of these itis. We don't use that language, but in their check-in, you're going to be like, I think I know what this is, right? So here's a list of the 13 itis. The susto is a sudden shock or a trauma. It's going to impact our teyolia, our heart. The espanto is more of a supernatural fear. This will impact our tonali. And then miedo, or fear, more related to a worry or a phobia, is going to impact our ihiyoto. In Spanish, all these three words mean the same thing, but they do have a different vibration, so to speak. Then we go into tristeza, or sadness. That's our teyolia. In Mexico, we say coraje, but it's enojo, I think more properly in Spanish. So dealing with anger. And that's the ihiotl. The celos or jealousy, this is very different from envidia, even though they seem to mean the same thing. But this form of jealousy is going to impact both the teolia and the ihiotl. Resentment, right? When we're holding on to something, ihiotl. Chinese medicine also teaches us that. Pena or sorrow is like that deeper grief, right? So it is sadness, but it's just like heart-wrenching, literally, right? So teolia. Egoism, egotismo, ihiotl. Envy, envidia, ihiotl. The vergüenza or the shame is the tonali, our consciousness, right? The guilt is also our tonali and our teolia. And then that sense of anguish is tonali and ihiotl. So this is going to impact, these itis can impact one of those three vitality centers. And, you know, for you as homework, you don't have to do it today, but it would be good for you to go through these 13 itis and see like which chakra are they affiliated with, because that could be another way to support a client's system. So we're going to get into the autonomic nervous system. So I'm going to pause the share for a little bit so I could scroll down, because we're scrolling down many pages. So if you have your actual handbook, we're going to go to where the illustrations are, and you can open up the hard copy of your handbook with that. Okay. I'll share it on the screen too, but I want to, it's easier to flip through the pages when you have it, when you have it on hand. So in the back of your guidebook, I include a lot of handouts. This is what makes this guidebook 60 pages long, is all these supplementals, but you're going to reference the supplementals for level 3. So it's also going to be helpful. So this is an illustration of the 13 sacred centers. The way this illustration is done was shared by grandmother Flor de Mayo, an elder in the community. And if you notice, her illustration includes the Mayan count. So dots are single digits, and then bars are the 5-digit. And so we start with the right ankle as 1, and then move up through each joint, 2, 3, 4. We go to 5, we go to 6. We go to 7, we go to 8, 9, 10. That's 2 bars, so that's 2 5s there. 11, 12, and then 13 is the neck, right? So these joints are the 13 portals of the body. And an aire can enter the body either through the joints or, as I said earlier, any opening, right? An aspect of the protocol can invite you at the end, like this is a good way to seal or end a Reiki session, is you would use a serpentine movement. So we're going 13, 12, 11, right? Working our way down each of those joints. So I say serpentine because we're going como la serpiente. And we end at the right leg, right ankle. And so what we're doing is we're like pulling out any residual energy that's not of service and sending it out, right? You can also bring in good energy, right? Starting with the right ankle. And again, you would do a serpentine movement upwards. So it'd be right, left, right, left, right, left, right, until you end at the neck, right? So you could bring in energy or you could take out energy. You're taking out energy, you're working top down. You're bringing in energy, you're working bottom up. Yeah. So I share with you the anatomy aspects of the body. So here are two handouts from about the anatomy. And notice how big that liver is. It is big. It literally takes up half our stomach space. This is the entire right side of the torso. This is below the rib cage, right? Going into our duodenum, right? So it's like this whole area. So if we think about the archway, even if you feel it now, right? So you feel the archway of your liver, it's like that bottom right tip of the rib cage, and it's under that, right? So here's our teolia, right? And here's our ihioto. And when we think about the anatomy in terms of, the organs, another reading of that is, oh, which chakras are here too, right? Because the endocrine system is the one we're going to visit in a moment. But here you have, for us, is the endocrine system that we're interested in, because this is our adrenals, and we're going to be looking into the nervous system, right? And and then we have the liver, right? And all its functions. It helps to filter debris, bacteria from the blood, right? So it helps clean our blood. And it really helps us with converting carbohydrates and protein into fats that produce factors that could clot our blood, which are helpful, and some of the vitamins, but also helps break down our food, right? So we really like our liver. I want to show you where the adrenal glands are. Super tiny, super tiny. They're smaller than the spleen. The spleen's tiny too. But this is where a lot of the impact of our nervous system impacts these two organs as well, the adrenals and the spleen. So we want to pay attention to those as well. Okay, let's keep going. So let's go into the autonomic nervous system. So we're going to read some of this stuff and support us in understanding a little bit of what's going on. So here we go. So the autonomic nervous system, along with the endocrine system, with which it is intimately related, controls the body's internal organs and regulates many overall body functions, such as blood flow, temperature, basal metabolism, muscle tone, and our ability to relax or stay alert and ready for action. So the autonomic nervous system is divided into two parts, sympathetic and parasympathetic. This is actually a little bit more complex than just these two parts, but for right now, let's understand it as sympathetic and parasympathetic. So if you look to the right, here is a shorthand of all the aspects of the sympathetic, right? These are its qualities. This is what it's related to. So this is very much fire energy, right? It's active. It's very physical. It's what keeps us alert, right? It's how if we're feeling dehydrated, it's too much fire, too much activity. We didn't bring in the water yet, right? It's our assertive emotions, right? Things that bother us, that makes us angry, irritable, etc., etc. The body tenses up in the sympathetic. it's not, it doesn't tense up to lock in. It's tensing up because it's getting ready to move fast, right? Danger is happening. I got to get out. What happens though is that when we operate, how to phrase this, when our sympathetic system is on overdrive, we're not able to come into a parasympathetic state, which is what our body needs to revitalize all those organs, right? And so often being in a highly sympathetic state can create also an imbalance. We like the sympathetic state because there are things that we don't need to worry about, like breathing, like our blood circulating. Things are operating on autonomic, right? Or automatic, because we are awake, we are alert. And so we don't need to be concerned. So we do like the sympathetic. What we need to be aware of is, when is it on overdrive or always on that on mode? So a cue to that too is if someone's sleep practice is not restful, their sympathetic state is still on, even while they're quote unquote asleep, right? So if you look at the illustration, we're trying to create this balance. Try and create this balance, right? So think of it as a seesaw. And in the session, why a client feels so much relief, or they're like, wow, I feel light, or I feel relaxed, it's because during the session, the work that was done, or the Reiki or the holistic energy, allow their body to come to a state of parasympathetic, or their nervous system to a parasympathetic state, that it turned off that activity. And that's why people feel like they love you when they're done with the session with you. Like, oh, I don't want to leave, right? I want to stay right here. And if you look at the right side again of the chart, right? So the bottom parasympathetic, here we have water principle, right? So fire and water. We want to bring those two into balance, not in competition, right? So this is all about relaxation, hydration, rest, sleep, right? This is an alkaline system in your body versus acidic. When we are in sympathetic mode, we are unconsciously absorbing or consuming a lot of acidic foods. When we're absorbing or consuming alkaline foods, we are helping to balance that nervous system even while awake, right? So it's kind of interesting how it starts to do that. But in a parasympathetic state, this is how our tissues can regenerate, can repair, because the other system went to sleep. It finally checked out and said, okay, I'm done working. All right, so this is a good like chart for you. We're gonna go into a few more things here. So the autonomic nervous system is controlled by a part of the brain called the hypothalamus, which also controls the endocrine system. Hypothalamus, do you know where that's at?
In the brain, yes.
But do you know where?
Um, I think it's like, is it higher brain? So
Yeah, so if you think about it like an arrow, I'll show you the illustration, but we have our pineal. Hypothalamus is like right behind that in the middle, and then our pituitary is in the back. So it's almost like all those three are connected. This is important to understand. So keep that like locked in on the side of the brain for right now. And so this is not just our brain activity, but also our emotional states and how we perceive our environment through our senses. Right? So the hypothalamus, did you ever see the cartoon Inside Out?
Yes.
So all of those little individuals in that brain center, that's
Mhm.
your hypothalamus.
Mm.
That's your hypothalamus, right?
Yeah.
So when the hypothalamus, right, if it's in charge of all of these things, our brain activity, our emotional state, and it's like surveying what's here, what's around me, what's happening. Just the thought of that, that's a lot operating at the same time.
Mhm.
And that is when that all of that is constantly operating, it puts our sympathetic nervous system on overdrive. One, and why I say it's a little bit more complicated is because one of the nerves that we have is called the vagus nerve, VAGUS. And it runs from like the brain down our neck all the way into our belly. It's kind of like our gut instinct. That's our vagus nerve. It's one of the longest nerves, but that too is impacted by the autonomic nervous system. And so there's a whole field of study of the polyvagal, and I won't get into that, but I'll introduce snippets of it in the next level. But I share all that because this is how vital our nervous system is. And, you know, sometimes we don't understand it and we don't pay much attention to it. So the simulation or stimulation, not simulation, excuse me, stimulation of the sympathetic nervous system, we usually define it as, oh, it's that survival instinct, fight or flight. It could also be freeze, right? Flight, fight, or freeze. It could also be freeze. It doesn't say that here, but it could be that too. So we have some physical things that happen, right? Our heart rate and strength of contraction increases, right? Because we need more blood to flow because we got to get out of here. Our air passages, open up so that we can breathe faster, right? Because we need to get more oxygen to our muscles so we can move faster. Our pupils dilate, right? So that we have an ability to see far, right? It's like, oh, that's where I need to go. Exit stage right. Also, our liver starts to release any glucose, right? So that it can help our muscles and our brain cooperate and move. And anything in our digestive tract starts to slow down or cease because we can't be digesting while we're running for our life. It's like, choose one. And the body chose for us. We're moving, right? We're moving. So it slows down our digestive tract. But also, this is where our inflammation or immune responses are suppressed. So if we think about it, theoretically, I'm not saying this has been proven or not, but a theory could be that a lot of the conditions that impact our immune system, or a lot of the issues that inflame the body, is an overactive sympathetic system. Right? But when we're in this state, pain even diminishes. We're like, ay, no me duele, no me duele. And then all of a sudden we come into parasympathetic. It's like, right? So It's so funny. It's like the complaint of like, oh my God, I take a day off and my whole body aches, right? And so this was why people keep working because their body aches when they take a day off. Hence, again, overstimulating the sympathetic. Coolness. All right.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on the sympathetic right now?
Yeah. I got some information about that, when we used to have to run for our lives in the forests, um, there was also this kind of release afterwards when we made it, which maybe is, yeah, like going back to normal or other releases, endorphins that kind of happen once we make it. And now, a lot of the things that we get stressed about or feel like put us into that fight or flight or freeze mode are not very intense to that extent of running for everything and then having that, okay, I made it moment,
Mm-hmm.
email or these, conversation or little things. So we don't get that like same release, of making it. And I realized that, that's also probably why I like surfing a lot, because it gives me that release. And so I think that helping folks find what's their release is helpful
Mm-hmm.
too. I see it with dancing and other body work and movement. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Beautiful, beautiful. I mentioned the vagus nerve earlier, and the parasympathetic is within the cranial sacral regions of our body. So this is like the spinal cord, and this is where we find it. And so we go into the parasympathetic, and a lot of this is about regeneration, repair, and nurturing. So some aspects that we can feel here is the liver starts to restore the glucose or whatever it used. It's like, okay, we could go back to storing some glucose for the future, right? We could get to digest our food again. Our immune responses and awareness of pain are promoted. So it's not that we experience more pain, but that is true. But in terms of our immune response, it helps to revitalize and support our immunity, right? We actually have blood flow going back to our internal organs. There's no need to be pumping blood so fast, so it goes into contraction, decreases. We're able to slow our breath, right? Because our air passages also constrict. So now we have our vision focused more on what's nearsighted, right? Versus farsighted. There's always an activity level in the sympathetic because this is what helps our breathing, our blood to circulate, and we don't even think about that. So there's always going to be an aspect of the sympathetic that is on. What we are paying attention to is the aspect that is on. Is it because it believes it needs to get ready to move? That's what we're calling attention to. Okie dokie. So one of the ways that you can evaluate, is there too much activation on either one, right? And so here's a few signs for you. Like this can be helpful when you see a client. Sometimes that hyperactive or hyper responsive, that one's actually an important one to pay attention to, especially when you're asking a client, are you okay with touch? Right? If a client has experience physical harm or sexual trauma, even though they know that they're with you, this is a session for their well-being to support them, there's still that aspect in
Yeah.
their body memory to be aware, right? And, sometimes clients are not able to get restful, and that's okay. But you will pick up on this because you will see, like, almost like the eyes are constantly surveying the space, right? There's like a quick, rapid action with the visuals. Um, you may not even be touching them, but close, and they'll feel it, right? It's just like, so it's very interesting. You will feel maybe even in your touch a buzziness in their body or in their field. Like sometimes I have felt that. It's like, ooh, there's like a lot of like something going on here, right? But you will notice when the shift happens when they're coming more into a parasympathetic state, right? And because during a session, a client can get definitely into a very deep parasympathetic state, we want them to come to a waking state. So that's why we suggest holding at the feet at the end of a session, right? Kind of like grounding them, right? It's like, okay, we're coming back, right? Gentle touch. So they're like, oh, yeah. Wow, that was great. I passed out. So you could read this list and review it for yourself. And one of the things that you may discover this weekend, but even as you practice this protocol, is just to notice when that shift, when you feel the shift going from sympathetic to parasympathetic within the client's body or the energy field. Like for me, sometimes what that looks like or feels like, a client probably takes like the biggest breath they've taken. Or my nervous system starts to like totally unwind and I
Mm.
start to yawn. Like those are different ways that I notice it. Sometimes it's a heat temperature. Sometimes it goes from a hot to a cooler. The pulsation of the body. Sometimes I'm saying like this happens remotely too, but when I'm in person, like all of a sudden it feels like the body drops and opens. Like that's another way that I notice the shift. So I encourage you to find what are those cues for you when it starts to switch from sympathetic to parasympathetic, and whatnot. Okay. So I share with you some anatomy, and here is where we are starting to pay attention to the body. We're going to do a lot of the work on the back for level 3, but this is where you notice the sympathetic chain of the ganglia, how it gets distributed through these different parts of the body. I'm going to scroll down a little bit more. And here we have the different elemental principles. We have fire, air, and water, and how it shows up on the body. But I wanted to show you, where are you? So this is the cervix parts of our spine up at the top. And what this illustration is showing you is all the different organs and where they're connected along our spine. So when the client is facing up, if you are holding at these spaces, you too are tending to that. So that first aspect of the protocol that I shared with you with the 3 energy centers, you can start that off while you're holding at the head. And then when you move down to the heart, you're holding at the back of the heart. And so this is everything in the thoracic cord, right?
Mhm.
And you notice that the adrenals is right there. So that's your mid back,
Mm.
right? And so you're tending to the adrenals while you're tending to the heart. And then you can move over to the liver and hold there, right? And so that's coming down to like the lumbar cord down here. And you could also hold at the sacral, right? So when we work with level 3, I'll show you different points of how to attend to these, but I bring this in because it helps you understand how intricate this system operates. Okay. So here's the hypothalamus. That's B right there in our brain. Did you ever see also Men in Black, the first one?
I did, but I don't remember it well.
So there's the man who dies, and then they open up his brain at the coronary, and the corner, they open it up, and so there's this little like alien inside that part. That's like that part where the hypothalamus is too. Like it's just like, another way to think about it is in the center of our brain is this kind of like butterfly bone. That's a sphenoid. In the center of the butterfly is the hypothalamus.
Mm.
Right? So there it is. Okay. Why so much emphasis on the head in this space is because a lot of what we can do in a session, and we're going to get into the second aspect of the protocol, is happening at the space of the head when we're literally holding the head. And so when we hold at the occiput and hold at the sacrum, it's also reflecting back to the space of the sphenoid and the coccyx. So the coccyx is the tailbone. The sphenoid I just shared is that little like butterfly bone right in our head, holding the hypothalamus. And here is illustration of how the bones operate. So a lot of this we're feeling like the eye socket, cheekbone, and we could get to the sphenoid by dropping in our finger in the mouth and going into this crevice here. It's harder to do it yourself. You do it with a client, but we're not poking or prodding because the sphenoid is very sensitive. Sometimes when the sphenoid is off balance, it could cause a mental imbalance, like schizophrenia or bipolarism. So, our sphenoid is very, very tender, very gentle, which is why it needs all these bones to hold it, to hold it in. But one of the things that we are tending to is we're relaxing the occiput, which is the base of our skull, right? The base of our head. If you were to touch now the top of your spine and at the base of your head, there's like a little nook, right? That's the part we want to be at. That's the occiput. So our hand, when we're holding it, either for ourselves or with a client, it's like we can literally hold it with our hand, right? We cup our hand, we can hold it. So that's one of the spaces we are holding at. So when we are tending to the sacrum, we're also tending to the occiput, and vice versa. When we're tending to the occiput, we're tending to the sacrum. When we're tending to the coccyx, we're also tending to the sphenoid, and vice versa, right? So these are two reflex points or polarity points. A lot of the protocols that we're doing at this level and the next level are attending to these areas. So, which is why I introduce it here. Okay. More anatomy for you, but this is the one I want to get into. So one thing that you could do within the protocol is, I call it the 8 points of light because I have no better name for it at the moment, but I kind of like the 8 points of light for myself. But this is where we are activating the part of the brain to start to be open and receive this work. So I'm showing you just this part for right now. Okay. So one of the things that Dr. Stone, this is an illustration from Digital Dr. Stone. There's a whole website that has all his like illustrations of the energy system and the energy body. It's actually quite fascinating. So this is one of them. So Dr. Stone in the I don't even know what to call it. I guess Kabbalah. In the Kabbalah, the centers of intelligence and spirituality are called Kether or Kether, and it's known as the crown of creation. I'm not too familiar with Kabbalism at the moment, so it's not a reference that I'm able to draw in right now. But I can share more tomorrow if that is a question that you have. But his interest in this was that our mind patterns and blueprints are expressed through this creation of life, also known as the tree of life. Okay. And for him, he started to map out these 8 points, and notice that 0 starts like right here at the eyebrow point, right? Like a third eye. So we're going to use either our index finger or our middle finger, and it's a super light touch, right? And if you remember, index and middle, right, creates activation, but middle finger is fire, and then finger is air. So you could be very intentional how you're doing this for yourself or for a client. But the idea is that we're activating these 8 points of light, and where you're stopping at, point 8, is right at the crown, right? And so, you know, it's kind of connecting here with the seat of the soul, right? Anja in Sanskrit, third eye, right? And so if we're connecting with the seat of the soul, guess what? That's our Tonali, right? We're waking up our consciousness. And so I like to do this aspect of the protocol of just touching, and I do it 3 times. 3 is always a magical number. But I do this aspect of the protocol at the beginning, right? So I've brought in that triangle, or I've brought in the green light and activated the triangle. I'm still holding at the occiput. I'm still holding the head. So now I need one hand free. So I will keep my other hand at the occiput, and I will bring in that possibility that they're calling in, right? I want to live in greater alignment with my life. And so it's like, well, let's just open up the possibility of what that could look like to live in greater alignment with your life, right? To follow and listen and trust your heart, to, whatever else is coming to you, right? And you do that 3 times, guess what? Something's going to happen. Something's going to happen, right? Because each of these areas has its own touch. And so, what are we touching? The seat of the soul, inspiration, aspiration, communion to oneness, faith, love, hope, truth, and all knowledge. Isn't that powerful?
Mm.
And again, any aspect that I'm teaching you of the protocol, you could do it on its own, right? So let's go ahead and take a breath. And we can open up our Viracocha and just kind of bring it up and around us. And so I invite you to imagine again that beautiful green light of your soul's energy dropping in through the top of the crown, clearing up any mental clutter that might be there, conscious or unconscious, allowing it to drop into your heart, revitalizing, supporting your heart, dropping into your liver, revitalizing and supporting your liver. That's most supportive for you at this moment. And then bringing up that light back to your crown, allowing this triangle to operate in the background. And I want you to connect to a thought. What is it, something you're ready to be in greater relation with? What is it, something that you're wanting to connect to maybe, or call in? And make it a sentence. It's very simple. I'm ready to connect to, or I'm ready to call in. Just make it very simple. Not a dissertation. It's quick, concise, something you can easily connect to right now. And once you have that thought, go ahead and touch right there at the eyebrow point at your third eye, and choose either your middle finger or your index finger. Be very intentional. And you're going to do this 3 times. You're going to gently sweep up the center line, up the center of the top of the head, and stop at the crown. And maybe it's helpful to say something like, I'm opening up myself to the possibilities of what this could look like or exist in my world. And you know exactly what you're calling in. And just take a breath and just notice what is showing up for you. Beautiful. And then gently lift up your Viracocha, your luminous field, back into that orb of light. And bring your palms together, bringing in that energy to each of your energy centers, and give it to the earth. How was that?
Yes. And yeah, I felt a clearing and grounding.
A clearing and grounding. Cool.
Mhm.
Yeah, right. So those are two aspects of the protocol that you're already practicing on yourself. Um, and when you're holding this at the client, when you're holding the client at the occiput, part of your hand is also touching the visual cortex area of the back of the head. And so, your hands are already charged up with Reiki.
Mhm.
So when you're doing this, it's opening up their visual cortex to invite this possibility. Does that make sense?
Mm.
Which is why it could be so potent. It could be
Yeah.
so potent, right? So these are the two ways that you open up this protocol. And so I share a little bit more of Dr. Stone's illustrations. So, here it kind of looks like the beetle, right? Um, and but this is the reflex points to the sacrum. And so how all of the, again, one of the biggest insights that he came away with after studying Ayurveda and Chinese medicine is how everything is related, right? How everything is related. And so even the part of the body that we're holding, this is a reflex point to the lumbar and the sacral. This is a reflex point to the lower dorsal. This is a reflex point to the upper dorsal. And so we are we're able to do a lot of this work at the space of the head, right? And so he even mapped out even more the physical, the emotional aspects, maybe even values and whatnot. So a lot can be done here. Just holding at the head. Like you could do a whole Reiki session just holding at the head,
Mhm.
right? And because there's so much here. There's so much here, right? And when a client is sharing with you what is happening, what's going on, you know, you can reference some of these areas, and it's like, oh, okay, let's support that. Let's support that, right? Okay, cool. So another reflex point to the lower part of the body is going to be the jaw. I'm not going to get into this one as much because much of this is for level 3. But when you are holding, so there's that hold and Reiki where your fingers are above the ear and they're coming down like part of the cheek. You can also lower that hold where your thumbs are at that hook behind the ear and you feel the jawline. So you're actually going to help their iliac. So as reflex point there, and you can, help drop this down. And it just helps to alleviate so much tension at the hip when you're working at these jaw points. But we're going to address that a little bit more for level 3. Okay. Let's see here. I show you this only because when the client is facing up, there is a point where we can hold the occiput and the sacrum at the same time. You can also drop your hand down and hold at the mid back and the sacrum. And this also helps to support the nervous system to get it into parasympathetic. And I also show you these lines because if you notice, these reflex points from the shoulder go and drop into the sacral bone or the coccyx or the hip bones, right? So we can map even the body in this way, front or back. This is showing you the back view because a lot of stuff is, we're going to need this for the 6-pointed star. This one is going to be something you could do when the client's facing up. And after you're holding at the heart, you're going to pull at the shoulder blade. If you're doing this remotely, obviously you're not pulling at the shoulder blade, but you can intend energetically to give space to that. Sometimes we're holding a lot in that mid back area. And this is going to make sense when we get into level 3, but this is a lot of our own history, right? Personal, familial, ancestral community, right? And so this is actually, feels really nice after you're holding at the heart to then end it by pulling at the shoulders on either side, because we want to do both sides. Okay. This is what I want to get into. So these aspect, I call them the diamond points in your protocol. And this is where you're going to be using those finger mudras. This is where you're intending, you know, am I moving something? Am I diminishing something, right? Am I closing something? Whatnot. So this is where you're going to use it. And if you notice in your illustration, where are these diamond points at?
The airs.
All the joints. All, you know, those 13 portals of the body, right? All the joints. The knees, the ankles, the hips, the wrists, the elbows, the shoulders, and even the neck here. I don't think Dr. Stone studied the 13 portals of the body, but he was definitely very aware of the joints, right? So I'm sure in Chinese medicine and Ayurveda, there's other teachings. So again, a lot of like cross-cultural information, right? It's like, yeah, okay. Our elders, our ancestors really knew about this. Kemetic, you know, teachings really mapped the anatomy of the body. They knew about the endocrine system and they mapped that, right? So it's like, okay, this is without technology and they were able to map the body. So it's fascinating to me. So one of the things that Dr. Stone also offers us is that we carry positive and negative energy within our body. The positive pole is at the top, the negative pole is at the bottom, the center is neutral. And he shares that also with the hands, right? So our neutral point is the thumb, and then we go negative with air and water, and positive with fire and earth. So you can think of that as like, you know, the batteries, right? You're connecting positive and negatives, et cetera, et cetera. If that is helpful for you, cool. If that is more confusing to you, don't use it. But a very simple way to address these areas is we're using the thumb, and we're using, you're either going to use, he says the middle finger, but I think you can choose either one. You can choose the index or the middle finger. And you're going to create these like contact points at each of the joints. Right? And so this is a good way to tend to these portals of the body so that you can see maybe, oh, there's possibly an energy leak here. Like a client might come to you and their question is, not their question, excuse me. You know, they're having a really hard time living in alignment with their life, right? But you don't know that yet. You don't know that yet. But they come to you because they're like, yeah, I really have this like achiness in my right knee. And so you probably go through your inquiry. Oh, well, did you have an accident? Did you injure it? Right? And they're like, yeah, you know, the other day I was playing basketball and it just went out. Right? And I couldn't get to work, blah, blah, blah. Oh, okay, cool. And so have you noticed other times when your right knee kind of gives out on you? Yeah, actually, I noticed it after I got back from my vacation where I had this beautiful epiphany about my life. And now you're like, huh, here we go. Right. So maybe there's something at the right knee, right? It's not like you're wanting to go to work, but because you have to go to work, but maybe you're trying to figure out how can I do my work in alignment to this epiphany? Is that possible? I don't know. I don't know. I really don't know how to do that. They're really like, I don't know. So you're starting with the triangle, you're starting with the 8 points of light, but now you can tend to that right knee and do these contact points, right? So again, thumb, and then the other hand's either the index finger or the middle finger, or you could do both, whatever feels comfortable. And the other points can be neutral. It could just be the two thumbs, right? But those joints, those areas are very critical because they are what allow us to have movement, right? Someone might be like, oh, my right wrist. Oh, I'm sure it's carpal tunnel because of how I'm like working at the computer. But maybe it comes out in the session that they've been wanting to write their like epic novel and they can't get to it only on the weekends. And then they really don't have energy for it, right? And then all of a sudden, this hand, the wrist, right? So sometimes it's energetic. But I show you this because we're going to connect to these diamond points in the session as well. Okay. Going to, yeah, we'll end here. So I'm going to pause here so we could go on a meal break because it is already 1:20. So for you, let me share.